All right, let's just jump right in. Populism. It's a word you hear everywhere, right? And it's one of the most powerful and honestly most confusing forces shaping our world today. So the big question is, what is it, really?
I mean, you hear it all the time, but it seems to describe completely different things depending on who's talking. And that's because, at its heart, populism isn't really a fixed ideology. It doesn't have a specific political weight, you know? It cuts across the left and the right, theory and practice, which makes it just so hard to pin down.
And this right here really gets to the core of the puzzle. How in the world can one word describe both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump? Think about it. Sanders goes after a corporate elite, saying they threaten the shared civic values of a really diverse country. Trump, well, he critiques a political elite, but his idea of the people is way more limited, defined more along ethnic and cultural lines. So you've got the same label, but wow, two completely different visions.
But here's something we do see a pattern in. Populism seems to surge whenever there's a big crisis. You know, moments of major uncertainty. We're talking financial collapses, huge social upheaval, that kind of thing.
And it's almost always fueled by this really emotive, sometimes aggressive, and often pretty angry style of politics. It's not just policy, it's a reaction. It's a passionate, gut-level response to that feeling of crisis.
No matter who the populist is, left or right, it almost always boils down to this one incredibly simple, incredibly powerful story. It's the pure, good people versus a corrupt, out-of-touch elite. That's the core narrative. It's the engine that drives the whole thing, every single time.
So that brings us right back to our big mystery. If populism isn't a clear ideology with a checklist of beliefs, then what on earth is it? Well, the answer, believe it or not, has been hiding in plain sight this whole time, buried deep in the history of democracy itself.
See, to really get populism, you can't just look at it by itself. You've got to look at its historical twin, a concept that is literally the foundation of all modern politics.
And that concept is popular sovereignty. It's the big idea that gives modern democracy its legitimacy, this fundamental belief that all political power at the end of the day comes from the people.
Now, this is the key insight. The history of populism and the history of popular sovereignty, they aren't two different stories. They are one and the same story. They grew up together, they evolved together, and you just can't make sense of one without understanding the other. And let's be clear, this is not something new. And it's not just an American thing either. This is a story that's been playing out for centuries in this constant back-and-forth conversation across the Atlantic Ocean.
You can really trace the path of these ideas. It starts with the European revolutions of 1848. I mean, they just ignited this firestorm of debate about what rule by the people actually means. Then, those ideas travel across the ocean, and they directly shape American political thinking at a time when America was dealing with its own massive crises. And it's those exact arguments that eventually lead to the birth of the American Populist Party in the 1890s.
And it wasn't a one-way street. American thinkers were right in the thick of it. In 1848, you have a guy like John C. Calhoun actually giving advice to European leaders, the Prussian minister no less, on how to set up their new governments. It was this huge, shared international project. Everyone was trying to figure out what it really meant for the people to be in charge.
So when the American Populist Party finally bursts onto the scene, guess what narrative they use? That classic one. For them, the people were the salt-of-the-earth types, the hardworking farmers, the plain people who worked the land. And the elite? Oh, they were the faraway financiers back east, the giant monopolies and trusts. And this thing called the gold standard, which they famously called a cross of gold, that was crucifying the working class.
Okay, so what does all this history mean for us right now? Well, here's the big takeaway. This whole dynamic, this constant tension between the people and the elite, it's not a mistake. It's not a flaw in the system. It's a built-in feature of democracy.
Think of it like a cycle that just keeps repeating. First, a major crisis hits. Then, populist voices get louder, and they explain that crisis using that simple, powerful story we've been talking about, the people versus the elite. This acts like an alarm clock, rousing the people, the sleeping sovereign you could say, from their political sleep to take back their power. And then, after a while, politics kind of goes back to normal, until the next crisis kicks the whole cycle off again. So if there's one thing to remember, it's this. Populism isn't some kind of outside attack on democracy. It's more like a recurring internal mechanism. It's how popular sovereignty, the power of the people, fights back when it feels like it's being ignored or betrayed.
It's just part of the messy, complicated, and, yeah, ongoing story of what it means to have a representative government.
And that leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. If we stop seeing populism as a disease and start seeing it as a recurring symptom, maybe as democracy's loud, angry wake-up call, then the most important question we can ask ourselves is this: what is it trying to tell us now?